The velvet ropes had barely settled when the tension snapped. Inside the packed venue, murmurs turned into murmurs of disbelief. Jasmine Crockett, poised and radiant in a crimson blazer, stood near the entrance, until a sharp voice cut through the air. "You're not welcome here," barked the manager, his tone laced with smug certainty. The crowd froze. Phones tilted upward. A few gasps escaped lips. Crockett didn't flinch. She glanced around, searching for clarity, but the manager was already motioning security. "Escort her out," he said, loud enough for the cameras to catch. The guards hesitated. She was a sitting congresswoman. But the manager's nod was firm, arrogant, final. As Crockett was guided toward the exit, whispers turned into a storm. "Is this legal? Why her? What's going on?" The room buzzed with confusion and quiet outrage. A few attendees stepped forward, but were blocked. The manager smirked, arms crossed, basking in the spectacle. Outside, the air was thick with disbelief. Crockett stood tall, her expression unreadable. She didn't shout. She didn't resist. She simply waited. Then, a low rumble. Heads turned. A sleek black Rolls-Royce glided into view, its chrome glinting under the streetlights like a blade. The door opened slowly, and in that moment, the narrative began to unravel. Inside, the manager was still gloating. But outside, something far more powerful was unfolding. Something that would flip the script, ignite social media, and leave the entire country speechless. Because what happened next wasn't just unexpected, it was unforgettable. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just another guest. She was a symbol of grit, of representation, of the kind of leadership that doesn't ask for permission to exist. Her presence at the venue wasn't incidental. It was intentional. A black woman, a congresswoman, an unapologetic voice for the unheard. And yet, in that moment, she was treated like an intruder. The manager's dismissal wasn't just personal, it was political. It echoed centuries of exclusion, the kind that tells women of color they're too loud, too proud, too inconvenient. The crowd's silence wasn't neutrality, it was complicity. And Crockett's quiet exit wasn't weakness, it was restraint. This wasn't just a venue. It was a stage where power dynamics played out in real time. The manager, white and smug, represented a liberal elite that preaches inclusion but practices gatekeeping. His decision to eject her wasn't about rules, it was about control. And Jasmine's removal wasn't about decorum, it was about erasure. But Crockett had walked through tougher doors. She'd fought through courtrooms, campaigns, and congressional hearings. She'd stood firm when others folded. And now, she stood outside, calm, composed, and waiting. Inside, the manager relished his moment. He believed he'd made a statement, but he hadn't realized the stakes. Because this wasn't just about one woman. It was about every woman who's ever been told she doesn't belong. It was about every immigrant who's ever been asked for papers, every activist who's ever been silenced, every voter who's ever been turned away. And while the cameras inside captured arrogance, the cameras outside were about to capture something else entirely. A low hum began to rise. Heads turned. The crowd near the entrance parted. A Rolls-Royce, sleek and silent, approached like a whisper with weight. Its arrival wasn't loud, but it was seismic. Because just outside, something was approaching that would flip the entire narrative. He called himself a progressive, a champion of equity, a voice for the voiceless. On paper, the manager of the venue was everything the left claimed to stand for: diversity, inclusion, justice. His social media was a curated gallery of virtue: selfies at climate marches, retweets of civil rights icons, captions dripping with performative empathy. But behind the hashtags and hollow slogans was a man who had mastered the art of selective morality. He didn't mind diversity, as long as it didn't challenge his authority. He didn't mind strong women, as long as they didn't speak louder than him. And he certainly didn't mind black voices, as long as they were palatable, polished, and deferential. Jasmine Crockett was none of those things. To him, she was a threat wrapped in elegance. A woman who didn't ask for permission to lead. A politician who didn't soften her tone to soothe fragile egos. And that made her dangerous, not to the system, but to his ego. The manager had built his reputation on being the good guy. He'd hosted panels on racial justice, moderated forums on gender equity, even posed with immigrant families for photo ops. But when it came to power, he clung to it with the same desperation as the very people he claimed to oppose. His staff knew the truth. They'd seen him berate interns, dismiss women's ideas, and silence dissent with a smile. But the public didn't. To them, he was a progressive icon, a gatekeeper of liberal spaces, and that illusion was everything to him. So when Jasmine Crockett arrived, uninvited, unbothered, and unapologetically herself, he saw not a guest, but a disruption. Her presence threatened the curated image he'd spent years constructing. She wasn't there to flatter him. She was there to speak. And that, to him, was unacceptable. The decision to eject her wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated. A power play disguised as protocol. He knew cameras were rolling. He knew the crowd would hesitate. But he also knew that in liberal circles, silence often masquerades as civility. And so, with a smirk and a nod, he made his move. He thought he'd won. Thought he'd reminded everyone who held the keys. Thought he'd sent a message that even the most accomplished black woman could be dismissed if she didn't play by his rules. But what he didn't realize was that the moment he pushed Jasmine Crockett out, he pushed the truth into the spotlight. The truth about performative progressivism. The truth about gatekeeping dressed as activism. The truth about how power, even in liberal spaces, still fears authenticity. And while he stood inside, basking in the illusion of control, something outside was shifting. Something he hadn't accounted for. Something that didn't need permission to arrive. Because they thought they'd won, but they hadn't seen what was coming. Jasmine Crockett didn't arrive at power by accident. She earned it, every inch of it, through grit, grace, and a refusal to be silenced. Born in St. Louis, Missouri, to a pastor father and a mother in public service, Jasmine grew up in a household where faith met duty. Her parents taught her that dignity wasn't something you wore, it was something you lived. She was supposed to become a CPA. That was the plan. But plans changed the day she received hate mail in college. Her black friends' cars were keyed. Her campus, once a place of promise, turned hostile. And when the administration froze, unsure how to respond, a lawyer from the Cochran firm stepped in. That moment cracked something open in her. She saw what justice looked like, not in theory, but in action. And she knew then, she wouldn't just study numbers. She'd fight for people. Jasmine became a lawyer. Not the kind who chased headlines, but the kind who chased justice. She worked as a public defender in Bowie County, Texas, representing thousands of clients, many of whom had never had someone truly stand up for them. She didn't just defend protesters during the Black Lives Matter movement. She did it for free. She didn't just speak about injustice. She showed up for it. Her courtroom presence was quiet but commanding. She didn't need theatrics. Her words carried weight because they were rooted in truth. And when she transitioned into politics, she brought that same energy with her. No filters. No apologies. Just service. In the Texas House, she fought for civil rights, voting access, and economic equity. She didn't play the game. She rewrote the rules. And when she won her seat in Congress, it wasn't just a victory for her. It was a victory for every woman who'd ever been told she was too bold, too black, too much. But Jasmine never let the title define her. She still walked into rooms where she wasn't expected, still spoke truths that made people uncomfortable, still carried herself with the same quiet strength that had guided her from courtroom to Capitol. So when she was thrown out of that venue, she didn't flinch. She didn't shout. She didn't beg. Because she'd been here before, in different forms, in different rooms, with different faces. And every time, she'd responded the same way, with dignity. The manager thought he was making a statement. But Jasmine Crockett was the statement. Her presence alone was a disruption to the status quo. Her silence, in that moment, was louder than any protest. And that's why what happened next wasn't just poetic. It was personal. Inside the venue, the air was electric, charged with confusion, discomfort, and something else, anticipation. The crowd hadn't expected drama, but now they were part of it. Whispers rippled like static. Did she just get kicked out? Isn't she a congresswoman? What the hell is going on? Phones lit up. Screens glowed. People angled for better views, capturing fragments of the moment, unsure whether to post or just watch. The manager stood center stage, arms folded, basking in the spectacle he'd created. He didn't just eject Jasmine Crockett. He made her a headline. She was disruptive, he declared, voice raised for effect. We have standards here. This isn't a place for grandstanding. His tone dripped with condescension, each word crafted to sting. Some people think a title gives them a free pass. Not here. A few gasps, a few nods, but mostly silence. The kind that doesn't agree, but doesn't dare to disagree. He wasn't done. She came in uninvited. She thought she could hijack the conversation. That's not how we do things. Not in this space. The irony hung heavy. A space built for dialogue, now weaponized to silence. A venue that claimed to uplift voices, now echoing with exclusion. Outside, Jasmine remained composed. She didn't pace. She didn't protest. She simply stood, a portrait of restraint. Her silence was louder than his tirade. Inside, the manager continued. We welcome real leaders. Not opportunists. Not agitators. It was a performance now. A public shaming wrapped in policy speak. But the crowd wasn't fully buying it. Some shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered her name. And some, quietly, stepped toward the windows. Because something was happening outside. A low hum. A vibration beneath the noise. Heads turned. Conversations paused. The manager faltered mid-sentence. The Rolls-Royce pulled up. It didn't roar, it glided. Sleek, black, and unapologetically elegant. The kind of car that doesn't ask for attention, it commands it. The crowd moved toward the glass. Phones raised again. The manager's voice trailed off. And in that moment, the power dynamic shifted. Because this wasn't just a car. It was a statement. A symbol. A presence. And what happened next would rewrite everything. The Rolls-Royce didn't just arrive, it announced itself. Not with noise, but with presence. Its polished black frame reflected the chaos inside the venue, the confusion outside, and the tension that hung in the air like smoke. It was the kind of car that didn't need to prove anything. It simply existed, and in doing so, shifted the gravity of the moment. The door opened slowly, deliberately, and out stepped Marcus Crockett Sr., tall, composed, dressed in a tailored navy suit that whispered wealth without screaming it. His expression was unreadable, but his energy was unmistakable. Calm, commanding. The kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly who you are and exactly what you're about to do. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The crowd outside instinctively stepped back, forming a quiet corridor between him and Jasmine. She turned, met his eyes, and for a moment, the world paused. No words passed between them. None were needed. This was a moment built on years of partnership, of struggle, of shared purpose. Inside, the manager was still mid-rant, unaware that the narrative had already shifted. She thought she could hijack the event, he barked. But we don't tolerate that kind of behavior. Not here. A staffer rushed in, whispering something urgent. The manager waved him off. I don't care who's outside. We've made our decision. But the crowd did care. They were no longer listening to him. They were watching the scene unfold through the glass, phones raised, mouths slightly open. The Rolls-Royce had become a magnet, pulling attention away from the stage and toward the sidewalk. Marcus walked toward Jasmine, then turned to face the venue. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't posture. He simply stood there, a living contradiction to every insult that had just been hurled. His presence was the rebuttal. His silence was the counterargument. And then, he opened the passenger door. Jasmine stepped in, not hurriedly, not defiantly, but with the grace of someone who knew her worth. The crowd outside erupted, not in noise, but in awe. It was the kind of moment that didn't need sound to be deafening. Inside, the manager faltered. What's happening? He asked, suddenly unsure. The staffer whispered again. This time, he listened. That's her husband, the staffer said. Marcus Crockett, real estate mogul, consultant. He's worth millions. The manager's face drained of color. His smirk faded. His posture shifted. He looked around, realizing the crowd was no longer with him. They were filming him, judging him, abandoning him. He tried to recover. This doesn't change anything, he said, voice cracking. She still broke protocol. But the crowd wasn't buying it. They'd seen the contrast. The arrogance inside versus the dignity outside. The petty power play versus the quiet show of strength. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't need to. The Rolls-Royce spoke for him. It spoke of legacy, of earned respect, of a life built on substance. It wasn't just a car, it was a message. You don't get to define us. You don't get to erase us. You don't get to win. Jasmine sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She'd been humiliated, but she hadn't been defeated. She'd been dismissed, but she hadn't been diminished. The manager tried one last time. "This is a distraction," he said. "We need to focus on the event." But the event was over. At least, the one he thought he was hosting. Because the real story was unfolding outside. And it was being recorded, shared, and immortalized in real time. The Rolls-Royce pulled away slowly, leaving behind a crowd transformed. Some clapped. Some cried. Some simply stood in stunned silence. And inside, the manager stood alone, his authority crumbling, his image shattered, his moment stolen by something he couldn't control, dignity. And just like that, the tables weren't just turned, they were shattered. The moment the Rolls-Royce pulled away, the internet ignited. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine Crockett's quiet exit and her husband's cinematic arrival flooded TikTok, Instagram, and X. The hashtags were relentless. Hashtag mic drop moment. Hashtag Jasmine Crockett. Hashtag power in heels. Hashtag political drama. One video, captioned, "She didn't say a word, but the car said everything," hit 1 million views in under an hour. Memes followed like wildfire. One showed the manager's stunned face with the caption, "When you realize you just kicked out Congress." Another featured Jasmine stepping into the Rolls-Royce with Beyoncé's "Upgrade You" playing in the background. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a cultural reset. Commentators jumped in. Progressive pundits called it the most elegant clapback of the year. Feminist bloggers hailed Jasmine as the embodiment of grace under fire. Even late-night hosts couldn't resist. One joked, "If dignity were a vehicle, it'd be a Rolls." But it wasn't just entertainment, it was impact. Politicians weighed in. A senator tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett reminded us that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it arrives in silence and leather seats." Civil rights leaders praised her restraint, calling it a masterclass in composure. Even conservative voices, usually critical, admitted the optics were devastating for the manager. Celebrities joined the chorus. Viola Davis reposted the clip with 3 fire emojis. Kerry Washington called it a moment for every woman who's ever been told to sit down. Ava DuVernay simply wrote, "This is how you do it." And then came the ripple effect. The venue's Yelp page was flooded with 1-star reviews. "If you don't respect Black women, you don't deserve our business," one read. A petition demanding the manager's resignation gained 50,000 signatures in 24 hours. Sponsors pulled out. Events were canceled. The illusion of progressivism shattered under the weight of public scrutiny. But the most powerful reaction wasn't outrage, it was validation. Young women posted videos of themselves walking tall, captioned, "Inspired by Jasmine." Immigrant daughters shared stories of being dismissed, now feeling seen. Black professionals quoted her silence as strength. The moment became more than viral, it became personal. Because America saw what dignity looks like, and it was wearing heels. "They tried to humiliate me, but I walk with legacy." Those words echoed in Jasmine Crockett's mind as she settled into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, its leather cushions a testament to power rooted in purpose rather than bluster. In that moment, humiliation dissolved into resolve, and every insult heaped upon her became fuel for her mission. She understood that respect is not demanded through force, but earned through unwavering commitment to justice and service. Her legacy stretches back generations. From her grandparents who worked without complaint to build opportunities for their family, to her parents who poured faith and principle into her upbringing, Jasmine carries their stories like a banner. Each triumph and setback they endured flows through her veins, a reminder that dignity is inherited and defended. With every step she takes in public life, she walks alongside ancestors whose quiet endurance paved the way for her voice to be heard. They tried to reduce her to a spectacle, but she refused to play that role. When the venue's manager attempted to erase her presence, he unknowingly illuminated the very biases she fights against. The assumption that a woman of color must yield to convenience. That assumption shatters under the weight of her determination. Jasmine sees beyond personal affronts to the systemic patterns they reveal, patterns that demand dismantling in pursuit of a more equitable society. Her husband's entrance in the folding exterior of the Rolls-Royce was no mere rescue. It was statement and supplement to her truth. The car spoke of achievement built on integrity and partnership. It symbolized that they move forward together, unbowed by petty power plays. In that polished frame, The world glimpsed a narrative of resilience and reciprocity. True power lifts up rather than tears down. Today, Americans watched and learned what dignity looks like in action. They saw that grace under pressure transcends performative trophies. When cameras cut away from the luxury exterior to Jasmine's steady gaze, viewers recognized something they desperately need in politics: authenticity rooted in service. This was not a fleeting spectacle, but an embodiment of values that bind communities: justice, respect, and solidarity. This moment belongs to every person who has been judged for speaking up, for standing out, for simply existing in a world that too often demands conformity. It reaches across lines of race and creed, immigrant and native, reminding us that our nation thrives when every voice is honored. The roar of engines fades, but the echo of her resolve reverberates in social media feeds and dinner table conversations alike. As the Rolls-Royce disappeared into the night, Jasmine Crockett's words lingered. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a reminder that grace always wins. And here, at this intersection of personal victory and collective aspiration, her story transitions from isolated spectacle to a call for enduring change. What unfolds next will define not just her path, but the arc of justice itself. Despite the manager's attempt to diminish her, in that unforgettable instant when Jasmine Crockett was cast aside, the world saw more than a political spectacle. We witnessed a lesson in power, a display of dignity that transcended arrogance. When her husband's Rolls-Royce arrived, it wasn't about wealth or status. It was the purest retort to disrespect. It reminded us that true strength is silent, yet unmistakable. In a world of arrogance, be the Rolls-Royce. Stand firm in your conviction. Let every slight fuel your resolve. Carry your legacy with grace, and let your actions speak louder than hurtful words. Jasmine's story shows that when disrespect tries to push you out, you have the power to drive the narrative. If you believe dignity belongs to everyone, if you stand with those whose voices are too often silenced, then join our community. Subscribe now for more stories that inspire, provoke, and uplift. Share this video to spread the message that respect is not optional. It's essential. Stand for dignity. Stand for justice. Stand with courage. Hit the bell so you never miss a moment like this. Drop a comment below with your thoughts and tell us what dignity means to you. Together, our voices become a chorus that amplifies change today.